Welcome back to the podcast, Greg.
Hey, great to be here as always.
It is good.
I'm good.
And hey, I'm excited. Excited to be here and looking forward to it. And we're continuing to journey through some conversations. You know, we just talked about a few weeks back, have faith, endure, work hard. Today, we've got a fun topic about parenting. And before we go any further, I don't want our people who are single listening or you're married without kids, I want everyone to check in because I really do think of the verse like marriage should be honored by all. I do think there's lessons to be learned about parenting regardless of what season you're in.
And grandparents need to be reminded of parenting and their contribution. It's different, but it's important.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's good because I'm in a I want to start with a reference to something you said when Brooke and I were early on. We had, I believe, probably like a 3-1 and 3-1 or maybe a 4-2 and I don't know. We were early on with the baby stage, right? And you had made a statement that really got my attention because we were having a hard time. You know, you're not sleeping. You're not. It's
it's exhausting. Yeah,
it's tough. It's a tough stage. And you had said, "Hey, hang in there. I promise it gets easier." Okay, and I just kind of want to start with it because fast forward, that was over a decade ago. You said that. And I would agree with you. I'm not saying it's gotten easy.
Yeah.
But I would say it's gotten easier. Why do you think that happens? And the reason why where do you go with that?
Well, I'll make a disclaimer. If you do not redeem those hard early years, it does not get easier. It probably gets worse. But if you will lean into those years and see them for what they are, I mean, they're the foundational building blocks of the young person that your children are going to become. And I don't want to give too many metaphors that are scary, but when your children are young and when they're babies, infants, toddlers, those first, I really think 5 to 6 years. You're on a war footing. It's war, it's battle, it's a must-win. Again, not to scare people, but you're gifted this little heart of a child that doesn't know right from wrong and doesn't have a formed conscience and doesn't have the Spirit of God in their life. I mean, those years are so crucial. And, even the child development people will tell you that like 85 to 90% of a kid's worldview is established in the first 5 years of their life. I mean, you think about that. I mean,
that's wild.
I saw that statistic. It's been over 20 years when I had little kids, honestly, when I saw that and did some additional research. Just, okay, is this just one guy's opinion? It's like, no, across the board, everyone in child psychology, developmental health, they're all saying that, 80, 85, 90%. Okay, so what's that mean? That means their view of life, their view of honesty, integrity, what's right, what's wrong, a parent's authority, who God is, especially as believers. We're going to get into biblical worldviews being foundational. All of those things in general come in those first 5 to 6 years. And so what that tells you, I think, as a parent is you must be very intentional. And I know that's when the fatigue is the worst. And, I remember people that had babies that had colic and, oh, man, those are exhausting. They're not sleeping good. They're not eating good. And you have all these complications thrown in. But again, I would just tell anybody, it's not really a marathon in the sense of it's not that hard their whole 18, 20, 21 years, however long you want to say that they're under your authority. It's not that hard all the time. So look at it as, I always thought as an old athlete, to me, the 400-meter run was the absolute worst run. It was the worst event because you start hard and you never get to turn it off. As a long distance guy, there always felt like there was a place in every race where you kind of you hit a pace and you just kept pace, and then you had to kick at the end. 400 meters, you just go on the whole time. Well, the first 5 years or so, I think it's like a 400-meter race. You just got to bust it. You never take a day off. And I mean that in terms of if your kid's being reckless or rebellious, you got to win. You can't look the other way. You can't say, well, I'll worry about that another day. If they come home and someone's taught them some, worldview crud that's just from the enemy, you can't say, well, that'll work itself out, or
Yeah.
I'll deal with that later. You have to win,
Yeah.
because you're only given this window of time. And if you go to sleep and you don't win, then you're going to have a little hellion on your hands at 6, 7, 8, and they get harder to deal with, But if you do the work and you fight that fight, I think that's what I meant when we were talking a long time ago. They get to 12, 13, 14, and you start seeing little glimmers, especially when they get saved and they have the Spirit of God in their life. You see these little glimmers of who they're going to be, and you see God working in their life, and you begin to realize, oh, man, there's a day coming when, maybe, and this is true in a lot of our cases, I think my children they're more mature in their early 20s than I ever was in my early 20s, because, again, but we were intentional, and we were involved in a church, and we had Awana and all these resources, and even Upward Basketball and things. We did all of these things to help teach them morally what was right and wrong, and to know who God was. And it starts paying off all of a sudden, because you realize they have lots of spiritual advantages I didn't have when I was a kid, and sometimes I'm really humbled by how mature my kids can be. And I think, again, it all comes down to we knew we had to win. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but that's your opening statement, I guess.
That's good. Well, I don't know if I'm in like phase 2 of parenting, but you had made that statement to me. We had the babies and the toddlers. I feel like that's the season of parenting. And then you got like your preteen, teens. That seems to be a season. And then you've got your, college/young adult season. And then obviously you referenced grandparent, and then maybe that's a new season as well. There's a lot of babies being born in our church, so you got a lot of new moms and dads, or moms and dads who've welcomed another little one in the home. How do you, because I hear you saying that it is formative, and I've heard the same. It's like, okay, this is true. We know this. How do you redeem that when you know that's true, but you're not sleeping? And let's be honest, I remember this might have been back when we were doing 3 services, but I remember, for some reason, I just picture you in the fellowship hall saying this, but how when the less sleep you have, you literally lose IQ. Like, it's like your brain literally doesn't function at its best capacity. And the longer you go without that sleep, it doesn't get any better.
Yeah, it gets worse, yeah.
And there's a season of that. And some babies sleep great, and some do not, right? Like, you just don't know what you're going to get. But how do you, regardless of what the sleep looks like, there's the increase of responsibility, the demand of just life, taking care of this precious life that you've been given, that you love so dearly, but it's this demand that you didn't see coming.
Yeah.
Mike I like how he's always said, the learning curve for a couple's first child is so steep. You just can't know until it happens.
Yeah. Our daughter, great. She jokes all the time, like we just experimented with her, and then we figured it out. She's got all these scars from stuff we didn't have a clue about, and now our boys have benefited. That probably true,
That's tough. Yeah. Yeah, you got to feel for the first kid. Yeah, that's the firstborns. What are some wisdom that you would pass on to new parents in those early years, in that early stage when those are formative, but you are in survival mode to some degree because of the demand and all these things that were new you didn't see coming, but you don't want to stay in survival mode. You're going to miss out on really making the most of being intentional, even when they're not talking yet, but there's things we can do as parents. So what are some things that might help if you're looking back, you're a few phases from babies and toddlers. So looking back, what would you encourage young couples in the midst of that craziness? How do we make sure that I know you're surviving, but also let's not live in survival mode?
Yeah. Well, I think establishing and maybe understanding goals to me makes a big difference. I think you've got to understand from the minute you have a child that you have this precious resource that you're raising, and you need to redeem that time. Yes, you're tired, you're exhausted, but you've got to redeem that time. And again, you got to win. You got to be intentional, and you've got to win those fights, so to speak. Because here's the reality. It's funny. We live in a world where there are people who they know how to train like animals, dogs, horses. It's amazing what you can teach an animal, and it's amazing how we see that and we admire that. Oh, well, that's really cool. But yet we have a child and we're like, well, when they're a little bit older, I'll worry about that. And so no, we got some dude over here with a 6-month-old Labrador who's taught this dog how to. Like, I think you can parent your 6-month-old. Again, we're not going to be teaching them geometry, but what can a 6-month-old learn? What do they need to learn is probably even the better question. Well, you got to start teaching that. You can't put it off. You can't wait, even though you're tired. And I think in all that, it begs that marry smart. Marry someone who's going to help you because a mom having to do that all on her own, especially if there's any complications at delivery or they have to have a C-section or whatever it may be. You've got to have a partner in this, and husbands have got to be intentional about being there and being available and being dad. So you better have a partner. That sure makes a difference. And I would also say we see it some, a young family begins to have their children. It's like they disappear from church. And I'm like, whoa, that's, again, it's not because we need people to be at church so that our numbers are good. No, that's when you need community. Because you're fighting a fight day in and day out. You need to be able to go somewhere on a Sunday morning and say, hey, for an hour, I need you to give this child some biblical worldview so I can check out for a minute and go get spiritually healthy. That's perfectly normal, but people who just kind of hole up, I think you're missing a community resource with the body, and you're missing just that moment sitting in a life group, having everybody else say, "I'm exhausted." I feel your pain. This is hard. I mean, that actually, to me, that always encourages me to go on. If again, using the running thing, man, if I'm running and everybody around me looks like it's no sweat. That's discouraging. But if I'm running and everybody else is about to die too, I'm like, okay, this is normal.
This is normal.
I think I'm on track.
Do you think what's the verse about? There's the train up a child, but the other one like arrow in the hands of a warrior.
Yeah.
How does that one finish? Essentially talking about the children, like so children, like it's that same idea. How much of because I've seen the temptation in my life. I think we were part of a growing church. Like there's a lot of young families. Is part of this equation that some people do, they don't see raising kids as kingdom work. Like we forget the perspective that God and the responsibility of that. So we settle for, as long as I'm providing a roof for them and food, which is, in fairness, that's a huge part of it, right? Like provide for them, yes. But we're good with that. So a lot of men, especially, like if I'm providing food, I'm providing a roof, I'm providing, whatever entertainment, I'm lessons for whatever, then I'm good.
Yeah.
How can we help remind each other that there's more to parenting, regardless of what season you're in, than just the basic needs?
Yeah.
That they're and
well, I think you're brushing up against possibly the biggest lie of our generation, or at least one of the biblical worldviews that we've just completely abandoned. If you back it all the way up, why did God create Adam and Eve? Well, it says that he made us in his image, but you follow it along. He made us so that we might have a relationship with him, but he also made Adam and Eve to reproduce, supposed to have children. They were to tend the earth. They were to, be stewards of the creation that he created. So having children is kingdom building. And it's, I would even argue it's assumed by God as to what his creation would do. And I think it's in a sense, what God has done for man is supposed to do for his his and her kids, which is we're to reproduce, we're to create little kingdom builders, we're to train them up to have a relationship with us, but also to reproduce our values and to go out into the world and make a difference. And so our world today, though, would say that kids get in the way.
Yeah.
You know, that they're an unfortunate byproduct of the sexual act.
Yeah.
Whereas God would say, no, kids are the point. You know,
that's
and
right.
I think if you can keep that in mind, it's like, I'm not just afflicted with children right now. This is not an unfortunate, repercussion of the sex act, but this is why marriage is designed, and this is why sex works the way it works, and this is what a husband and wife are supposed to do. And you produce these little children, and then you train them up in the way in which they should go, and you shoot them out like arrows to make a difference. And again, in all that motif, I think that verse technically is written about boys, but I don't think it's limited to boys. There's a war mentality there. You're training up these little instruments of conflict. What are you shooting them out into? The world, the flesh, and the devil. I mean, and so again, if you're not training up your children to interact with that darkness, if you're not reproducing light in their hearts, then you're not producing what God's called you to produce. And again, not to make it sound harder than it is, but that's hard work.
Yeah.
Because everything pushes against you.
And I've been looking forward to this conversation because it's timely in the sense of you said that first statement to me, like I said, this is over a decade ago. So a decade later, I followed up about 5 years in. I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you, I was like, hey, why do you think it gets, because we admitted, kind of, you referenced this earlier, like it gets harder for some. And you did. You said, because I think it gets harder. You said, I think it does get harder for the ones that give up, the ones that throw in the towel, that ones that quit with the discipline, with the training, the conversations, the hard conversations, the trying to be their friend, with all that stuff. And that really was encouraging me because I feel like we're kind of in phase 2, and it's been fun to celebrate some of the fruit of all that work we put in. Like, hey, I'm starting out. It's not easy. In fairness, it's not easy right now. I'm not saying that. There's always challenges, and I imagine there's challenges for the next season, the next phase. We have teenagers now. It's like, well, one and soon to be. It's like we're kind of there, right, as far as teenagers go. But when they're beyond that, there'll be a new challenge. I know there's always challenges, but I appreciate your encouragement to me as a young dad who was struggling to sleep, because I actually did have people come up to me and they would ask me like, hey, how's it going? I'm in baby stage, right? And I would say, it's kind of hard, we're not sleeping a lot. And they would say, well, just you wait. It's going to get so harder. And I remember thinking, no, wait a second. Like, I just smiled and waved because, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not denying they had difficulty dealing with their teens. But my problem was, and I made a covenant with God, I'm not kidding you. I said, I will never forget what this is like. Because I think part of the problem is they forgot. They forgot what it was like to not sleep and what it's like to have this child has total dependence on you to eat, to every time something goes wrong and you're taking those multiple trips to the hospital, that's on you. You know what I'm saying? Like, no one else is doing that for that child. So that I remember thinking, like, I never want to forget that. So when I'm in a different season and a new mom or dad's tell me, we're not sleeping a lot, I never want to utter the words, well, just you wait, because that is not helpful.
It's not inspiring. No, it's not inspiring.
It's not helpful. So it's fun to see, like, I'm living what you've said, and while we've made mistakes in the home, certainly it's been neat to see that the fruit of that you were telling the truth. Like, if we stick with this, if we just keep working hard, like, we're going to see some things come out of that. And that's been really encouraging me to see. But the journey continues, it continues. And how can I, because I can check out on any given basis and kind of go back into default of survival mode.
Well, and I think it's crucial that we understand that our children are little entities that will develop. And, part of what makes it hard for a lot of people, they don't fight the good fight when they're little, and so they don't parent well. They take time off because they're tired, and they check out, and woe is me, and I'll do that some other time. And, their children, we have an unrestrained flesh nature unless barring the intervention of God or a good parent in our lives. And so you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves, and you're going to pay for that at some point. But also we don't I don't think we transition well from stages. And so, I know people who they're still parenting their young teen, like 11, 12-year-old, like they would a toddler. Well, that's not healthy.
That's good.
You have to learn to give them some decision making, and you have to let your children fail in a safe way, because lots of times that's the only way they learn.
And
Again,
parents are probably scared to death to do that, by the way.
Yeah, many parents are. That's why we've coined a new phrase in our generation, helicopter parents, which is basically that. I mean,
I don't ever want them to fall. I can't let them.
I got to swoop in and I got to fix whatever's broken. And I think at some point it's like, okay, son, that's broken. What are you going to do? How are you going to respond? Are you going to yell and throw a hissy fit about it like a toddler would, or are you going to make some intelligent decisions and learn and adapt and deal? It doesn't help if mom and daddy rush in and fix everything every time, because you're training them up to where at some point mom and daddy aren't going to be there. Not to mention, hey, I may always be available, but it's not always best for me to swoop in. So I think the inability to transition as your kids grow older and should be learning how to make more decisions themselves, or even self-parent or self-restrain. We either oppress them and we keep them young when they aren't, or we give them way too much freedom when they're not ready for it. And, a lot of people, well, that's complicated. I really don't think it is. I mean...
No, I think it's simple. I think
we just don't want to do it because it's hard. I mean, it applies time and energy and effort and prayer.
Exactly.
And,
we'd rather just sit and watch a game or something.
And whine about it.
Exactly. Yeah, complain. Yeah. And drop our kids off and go do something fun, because God forbid we actually raise a kid.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you. Sorry, I just. Hey, look, that's just as harsh to me.
That's the way the world says it.
Yeah, and I've seen the temptation in my own heart to do that, and I've seen people live that, and I'm like, and I've had older church members say they have horrible relationships with their kids who are now grown, and they are absolutely convinced it's because they watched what they did to them when they were 10, 12, 16, and I'm like, ding, ding, ding. Hey, I'm taking what you're saying. I'm taking what our church members are saying, and I'm making some connections here. Yeah. That we're not crazy and you're not crazy. There's an investment to be made, and it's a sacrifice, but we got to pay it. So in those early stages, I'll be honest, I feel like it took me till we had 4 kids. It took till my 4th one to really truly. Now, I'm not saying I didn't appreciate like Hallie when she was a baby, like I did, but it's the first one. It's like I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. It took me a while.
I even famously said about our first child, I'm like, when is she going to do something other than just lay there and cry? And I mean,
when do I get to be a part of this?
Is there some fun coming? It's very normal.
Yeah, you do. That's hilarious. But I do feel like with Miles, I finally could at least appreciate what small role I played in a baby's life.
Yeah.
Like even I really did finally get to the place where I cherished Holden. Like, I mean, I'm not saying I never, but like there was a point where I got, to your point, I didn't catch it until then, sadly, but I at least started to see, okay, seasons. Like the kingdom work right now is just to hold this child when he's crying. Like this is my job right now. And I've got to not have a bad attitude about it. And I've got to somehow find God in this and find Jesus in this most mundane place where it's just me and God and this baby. And I got to figure it out. So I love what you're saying, because I think that's so wise. And I see that, like, okay, me being in, I'm going to call it phase 2 because it feels like that. Like if I'm still parenting the way that I was, what are we doing? You said something recently, and then I know where that's going to lead. You said something recently, if it's okay to share this, that you've got great relationships with your kids now, and you feel like you're friends. But and I thought that was really cool, because years ago, this was during a sermon. Hope it's okay to share this stuff. But
if I said it during the sermon, I guess I'm on the hook. So.
But this was probably over a decade ago. So this puts all your kids, young, right? Probably back in my phase. And you said, I remember you saying, like, it's not my job to be my kid's friend. Like that, because if that's my goal, I'm not going to draw a line on that. I mean, that's what I was picking up you're saying.
Yeah.
If my goal is to be their friend at this season, then, then I'm going to lose the battle. But now I hear you saying, all these years later, you actually are friends with them, which is odd to me that the parents who give into the friendship early actually miss out on it in the long run when you are getting the blessing of it because you were willing to not have it for a season. That's really interesting to me.
I mean, I think that's one of the things, in terms of that natural transition, I think you got to figure out. I would argue if you try to become your children's friends before it's time, you will always be their parent. That's what happens.
That's
you're saddled with a perpetual child.
Wow.
And I think, like the 1 through 5 years, again, I'm not trying to be really firm on the dates here, but that young, developing, and you're a dictator then. You better be very comfortable saying that, do not do that, do that. I mean, you dictate because, and then we were very intentional. We saw some things that we really believed had biblical foundations. Like, you start telling a child as soon as they're old enough to really understand language, 2, 3, 4, what's the moral reason why? Like, this is why you do that. This is why you don't do that. As soon as they're able intellectually, you give them that moral reason why. But in general, when they're that young, you're dictating. You're a dictator. Then I think you become a coach. That's that transition of you're going to send them off to school. You're going to tell them how it's going to work. You're going to tell them what to expect. You're going to tell them what you expect them to do. And you're going to give them some sort of, you go to the office and you call me if you, that's that coach hat. They're not really making any moves that you haven't instructed them to make. Then it becomes the player coach, where you're giving them a little more latitude. They get to make calls on the field on their own. They still are under your authority. They still know what the game plan is, but you're trusting them, giving them some latitude. To me, that's early stages, birth through 5, and then you're getting into school age, like 6 through 10. Then you get in that pubescent, adolescent, or whatever. Those are the wrong terms. Adolescent, say 10, 11 through junior high-ish, that's when it's player coach. You're not ready to turn those knuckleheads totally loose at that age, But you've got to let them start breathing a little bit and learning and making decisions and experiencing consequences. And even, Dad, I don't want to play football anymore. Okay, well, explain to me why. And if that, then we just want to make sure you're physically healthy. So maybe we explore. You give them choices and you let them work through it. Then you reach a stage where I think, after all that, is that friendship stage. Again, I think it's going to be a little bit different per kid. It came maybe in my mind a little earlier than I anticipated because my kids have honestly shown greater maturity than I did at the same age. Although I will say, my parents are maybe old school. The day I left home and went to college, basically my dad shook my hand and it was kind of like, all right, you're a man, good luck out there, and honestly, with my personality, that was fine with me, it worked. But
that's great.
I'm not necessarily advocating that, but I do think if your kids are going to start their education and they're going to, start that, they have jobs, and you have to start treating them like a young adult if the goal is for them to be an adult. If you want to keep parenting them and babying them and sign up for all their college classes and buy them all their books. And I'm trying, sorry, that came across really sorry, but I know parents that are still parenting their 20-year-old, and it's like, what are you doing? Because where does it stop? Are you gonna parent him when he gets engaged?
Well, and that's the problem is they think they're helping, but they're actually cutting their legs out from under them. That they're not able to stand on their own 2 feet because they're always reaching out to mom or dad. Like, what should I do? It's like we've not equipped, because I feel like that's my goal. Like, we get, like you said, 18-ish years with them under your roof, give or take a few, depending on the situation, and then it's launching them out. And so I feel like
I don't want them to need me at that stage. I do want them. My heart's passion is I want them to enjoy being with me, and but it should be voluntary and it shouldn't be instructional unless they have a great question they want us to talk about,
I will say that it's an interesting season I hope people hear that I appreciate what you said to me that day. You never said, "Hey, Justin, just you wait, it'll get easy." You never told me that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it ever gets easy, and I'm sure there's challenges to every season. But what I will say is it's fun. Like, I think when it doesn't mean it's without challenges. I'm not saying that. We have some drag out fights with these kids going through puberty in our house. It's like, it's a wild time right now. Okay. But I just got to say, like, it's actually fun. Like, it really is. If you're willing to put in the work, like I feel like I can say this. I'm enough in the journey of grinding and that I'm starting to see that, like how you're getting the friendship phase. I'm in the phase where, like, we may not be there yet, but we still have fun together. Like, there's a respect that's there. They know, like, and there's times we're gonna it's going to be friction and they're going to know which way that goes, but it's fun. Like, I think that that's needed to be said. Like, I'm sad that too many people approach parenting as if it's this great burden and it's always this difficult thing, and they're missing the joy of what God designed it to be. Not that it's always easy, but man, it could be fun.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be fun. Of course, I think, all of life, we almost did a podcast today on joy as one of the fruits of the Spirit. And I think maybe this is where it dovetails. Life is meant to be fun. It's hard. There's suffering. I don't want to neglect all the things in Scripture that talk about that. But things like this, if God intended for us to have children, I think it's supposed to be redeemable. It's supposed to be fun at some point. And you've got to find the joy in it. And there's hard work, but then there's a season where I think, hey, teenagers, it'll be fun one day and it'll be a horror story the next.
1 minute.
That's what hormones do,
That's right.
that's part of the job as a parent, though, is to telescope out and remember, man, I remember what it was like when I was high one day and low the next, and all it took was one person saying, yeah, that's what your kid's going through. You're the adult. Have perspective. Have faith, endure, work hard. You're the leveler. Oh, it scares me when you see parents who are still, they're like that. It's like, how on earth are you parenting a teenager?
Is it fair
Because you're
to
the most
say-
emotional person I've seen in my life,
Is it fair to say then that some of that reward of parenting is earned? Like, you don't get that freely. You don't get the 15-year-old free. Like, that's earned because you paid attention during that 1 to 5 year.
Yeah, I think there's something by nature in the heart of a child that if a parent is broken, if a parent is demanding, if a parent tries to make them just like they were, I think there's an obstinate nature in a child that's going to be like, I don't want to be around that anymore, and you'll forfeit that relationship. And it's weird. It doesn't work. We think give them everything they want and they'll like us more. And the reality is there's something in the heart of a child. If you let them try to run off a cliff, they're going to realize at some point, Mom and Daddy aren't actually helping me. It's like they're pushing me toward doom here. They're attracted to a parent that loves them and cares for them. They need a track to run on. They need security. That's why divorce is so painful on children, because they need to know there's a mama and there's a daddy and they love me and they're committed to each other. They can't articulate that, but every statistic in the world tells you that a happily married couple raising children is the best thing for the mental health of a child. Period.
And then I heard a recent study. I wish I could remember what it was. I'd love to source it, but I won't. But essentially what they were saying was all these kids who were like in severe trouble in life, like making really, really bad choices. They interviewed like 100 of them, and they all essentially were saying the same thing, which is we wish we had more of that. We wish we had someone kind of giving us boundaries. Like a kid will act as if they want the total freedom.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think that's just a God designed thing.
Yeah.
They in their heart know that I want that.
Sometimes the behavior that pushes back against it is actually that cry for, I'm being a jerk right now, but I really need for my mom and my daddy to, gather their arms around me and put me in my place and send me to my room. And they're really crying out for, again, structure and security and love and affirmation all in one, it's a cry for attention, but we misdiagnose it.
Well, I hope this conversation has been, it's fun for me to revisit it, because being in the season I'm at, I'd still stay, maybe not early in the journey, but I'm still phase 2, right? Like I'm still, but I'm still learning a ton. And so it's fun. I appreciate the things you've said over the years from the pulpit, or maybe a lot of it I think I've heard. I know our church has heard because I've heard you say it from the pulpit. So I'm so thankful for that you've helped make those connections and you've observed things from the scriptures that as a young dad, I paid attention, and because I saw the temptation in my own heart, and it's still there, right? To reject that responsibility, to be mad about it, to want to check out. And I don't think you ever graduate to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to train my child up. Like, yay, let's go do that.
Yeah.
It's not. It can be a grind sometimes, and you're going to not want to do it at times. But it is so encouraging to hear someone that's further down the road that's like, hey, just keep going, hang on. Don't like I'm not crazy, like hang on. And, I know that it's probably worth saying on this podcast, since we're talking about parenting, that proverb, and I think we've referenced this before, but train up a child in the way they should go and they will not depart from you. that was, you said it differently, and I like how you said it. I can't remember, but general truths with assumed exceptions. Like, it's not a guarantee because people are people. So we can never look at a child who went crazy and made a bunch of horrible decisions and go, oh, well, they must have been bad parents. Because I've never liked how people do, you hear that. Like, wait a second, we don't know that. Because first of all, people are people. You can do everything right in the home, and that individual is still going to make their own choices. And sadly, sometimes the world, the flesh, and the devil can get the best of them and can get the best of us. So, but I like how you've said it, that it gives them a really good shot, right? Like
it's a principle, not a promise.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good way to keep it in mind. And I'm all about, let's find biblical principles and let's try to run on those tracks because they give you the best opportunity for a good outcome.
Yeah,
so,
I love it. Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep on trekking along, brother.
Hang in there.
That's right, man. So thank you for this conversation. And until next time, God bless.
God bless.